Well, I think there are basically three big influences that every airport needs to think about. Firstly, we are living in a period of fairly steady economic growth at the moment. Yes, there have been ups and downs, but generally speaking, the last decade has been a time of recovery from the big financial crisis and continued consumer growth. Secondly, though, we're also living in a period of incredible disruption when technology is upending many of our assumptions. And if you look at the speed at which digital technologies are changing consumer experiences and corporate life, it's absolutely remarkable, and it's likely to only accelerate. But the third big issue is about not economics but politics, because as disruption gathers pace, as we deal with the aftermath of the financial crisis, what we're also seeing is a big rise in populism. And no airport manager can assume that it's business as usual in terms of their interaction with the regulatory world, the political climate, or wider society, because many aspects of our political economy are changing today quite significantly. Airports cannot assume it's business as usual. They can't assume that the pace of technology change is going to carry on in the same way. There is something called Moore's Law, which refers to the computing power doubling every couple of years. We're seeing the amount of data in the world increasing at an exponential rate. And when you think about things like AI and automation, that really could transform a lot of the ways that airports are behaving. They also need to think about politics, because the political backlash against globalization is swelling in size. And although, ironically, much of today's global growth is driven by globalization, you cannot assume that there is actually a civic embrace of it going forward. I think every single person in the aviation industry, like other businesses, needs to recognize that it's no longer enough to look at economics or business just as a box, that increasingly consumers and politicians are demanding a much wider sense of social engagement. So whether it's looking at issues of the environment or corporate responsibility, whether it's looking at issues of economic inclusion, all of these themes that used to be put into a little box called corporate social responsibility are now coming center stage into business. Doesn't mean that we all have to turn into philanthropists, but it certainly means that you can't assume in an era of growing political protest and localization, not globalization, that they can be ignored. I think that increasingly people are going to be questioning what I call the holy trinity of Davos Man. When I go back a decade ago, Davos Man was very much driven by a belief in the idea of globalization, free market capitalism, and innovation, and this idea that would only go in one direction almost forever. What we've seen is that all three of those ideas have been challenged after the great financial crisis. And so essentially people need to think about how they deal with regulators in that framework and recognize that localization, not globalization, that a sense of social compact and sometimes government intervention, and a sense that innovation is not an unfettered good, are very much the bigger themes of the day, and that shapes how people talk to regulators.